Hello, and welcome to another spooky Rant Rave review. I'm a week late, as you may have noticed if you care about such things, because I filmed this on time, like a good YouTuber, and then I watched it and I was like, I'm way too mean. Like, way too mean. Much like I had to refilm my Throne of Glass review, because I was way too mean to Sarah J. Maas. I was way too mean to Jordan Peele, so I will try to be nicer in this refilming. And then I got busy and I didn't have time to refilm it, so here it is today. But don't worry, you'll still get 5 total spooky Halloween spooky reviews for this month. Without further ado, I'm going to rave about 3 spooky movies and then rant about a really dumb spooky movie. So, the first 3 are ones that you might never have heard of, or if you've heard of them, you probably haven't seen them. They seem to have just squeaked under everyone's notice, under the radar, which is a shame, because they're great. So the first one is The Eye. Not the American version, the Singapore-Hong Kong version. It is, I don't know, it was made like in the 90s or something. And the premise is, there's this woman who was not born blind, but she's been blind most of her life. And then she gets an eye transplant. And that means that she doesn't really have a visual vocabulary. For example, her doctor slash kind of love interest, after she has her eye transplant, he holds up a stapler. And he says, "What is this?" And she looks at it, and she looks at it, and she reaches out to touch it. And he says, "If you touched it, you would know it's a stapler." Because she knows everything by feel. But she doesn't know what things look like, which actually makes a lot of sense. I'd never thought of this before. It's a cool movie. It actually talks about, blindness. There's even a part where she's looking at the mirror and she's like freaked out because it's like a flat image, but it's, and we kind of see flat images even though we see in 3D. So just because you know what something would feel like, that does not at all translate to what something actually looks like. So she kind of has to learn that all over again. And while she is recuperating in the hospital from her eye transplant, it's late at night, and there's an old woman who's in the bed next to her, and she kind of sees this weird, dark figure, like, help the woman up, and she's like, what is that? She doesn't really know, again, what things look like. And she sees them go out in the hall, and she follows them, and they're just gone. And it quickly becomes apparent, quickly to her and quickly to the audience, that she can actually see ghosts, because the person that she got the eye transplant from could see ghosts. So her eyes are in some way connected to the spirit world. And it's really creepy, and it goes on from there. And what I love about this movie is, it's just creepy. Like, there's scenes where nothing actually happens, but you're just like, uncomfortable. I don't like it. So it's just very spooky. I feel like Asia does ghosts really, really well. And she can see things that aren't ghosts, like those tall gray figures. Probably Grim Reapers, like definitely not human spirits. So she can see other things. And aside from the spookiness of it, it's just a good story. They kind of have to, again, she doesn't want to see ghosts. So there's sort of this mystery of like, what happened to the person whose eyes she has? What happened to this person? Who were they? I'm not going to go into it, but you should see it. It's a good little movie, a tight little story. Even if it weren't scary, it would be a good story. It has build-ups and payoffs, and just, it's a nice little lesser-known film that deserves a lot of love. I don't own it, but if I could ever find it on DVD, I absolutely would buy it, because it is absolutely worth it. So, that's the first one. Second one is The Visit by M. Night Shyamalan, of all people. And I feel like the reason people don't know about this, because I tell people, have you seen The Visit? And they're like, what the heck is The Visit? It was after his fall from grace. So obviously he made really good, critically acclaimed films like The Sixth Sense and Unbreakable, Signs. And then he made The Village, which is scary, but it has kind of a lame twist. And then he made The Happening. Oh no! And then he made Avatar: The Last Airbender. Oh. So yeah, he flew too close to the sun. You cannot make that many good movies all at once and then expect to keep at it. So he had a fall from grace, and people make fun of him, and So I do this. I do this with writers. I'm like, no, I still believe in them even if I hate them. So I don't hate M. Night Shyamalan. I bear him no ill will, but he definitely made some real stinkers. But then he produced some movies. He had this scheme. I don't think it ever went anywhere, but he had this scheme to produce other people's movies, little newbie writers. And so there was a movie called Devil, which you might have heard of. It's like the one with the elevator doors, and it says Devil with the V on the doors. And that was a good movie. It was very small. I think it had a cast of like 8 people. But it's basically, the premise is, I mean, more or less, basically the devil comes back to torment people before he kills them, and there's 5 people in an elevator, and he's going to torment them all, and it's just great. It's just great. It's kind of not a whodunit, but very similar. Like, it picks off each person, and you don't know who's the devil, and it's a nice, tiny little film. It's a little corny, but that's okay. And of all the movies I've ever seen where the devil is, like, the bad guy, it's the most theologically consistent. Like, it actually deals with, here's how you defeat the devil, and I was like, what a twist. I mean, that's the biggest twist, really. But anyway, that was a good movie. A little spooky, a little scary. But then, M. Night Shyamalan wrote and directed The Visit. And in my opinion, it is his best movie. And I'm so sad that most people have never heard of it, because it's so good. It is scary. More tense than scary, just tense. But it also has heart. Like, there was literally, I cried at the end of this movie. I was, like, crying. There's parts where I laugh. The characters are likable. You actually care about them. It's just a good little movie. So the premise is, there's a lot to go into it. Basically, there's this teenage girl who's really pretentious, and she wants to be a documentary maker. The entire film is filmed with her camera and her brother's camera, and it's like their documentary of their week with their grandparents. And it says like Monday, Tuesday, etc. So she wants to be a documentarian, and she's really pretentious. And her little brother is middle school, like wants to be a rapper, like that kind of. They're dorks, but they're likable because you know that their dorkiness is not supposed to be in like a likable thing. Like her pretentiousness and his rapping are played for laughs. It makes them endearing. You care about what happens to these kids. So basically, their mother, when she was a teenager, had this horrible fight with her own parents, their grandparents. And she won't talk about it. She won't talk about why they fought or what they said. She just doesn't talk about it. Like, no, don't go there. And she hasn't spoken to them for years. Meanwhile, she has also recently divorced their father, or rather their father divorced her and left them. And so they're kind of dealing with those feelings of that, like, family break. And kind of to cope with that, more or less, they have this scheme to get their mom and their grandparents to forgive each other. And so, meanwhile, also, their mother is dating this guy, and they're like, oh, go off on this cruise with that guy. Have fun, Mom. Like, bye. And she's like, okay, bye. And agrees to let them stay with their grandparents for a week. And, you know, she says, don't talk about what we did. Just they're your grandparents, whatever. So their scheme is basically to make, well, the girl's scheme is to basically make this documentary about their mother and their grandparents coming back together. It's a very cute premise. But, of course, it's M. Night Shyamalan, so we're like, it's going to be horrifying. So they get to the grandparents' farm, which is, of course, in rural Pennsylvania, because M. Night Shyamalan. And the grandparents are a little bit weird, but not too weird. But, you know, for example, they say, we're old people, and so we go to bed early, so just stay in your room after 8 o'clock, don't come out of your room. And they're like, that's weird. And then they start hearing, like, scratching noises and running feet and these weird, like, noises. And they're like, ugh. And they see weird things. And it quickly becomes apparent that something isn't right. And that's why I say this movie is more tense than scary. It's just, you know, as the audience, you're like, something is wrong, but I don't know what, and I don't like it. And it's just so nerve-wracking and tense. And there's so many scenes where you're just like, something, like something could happen, and maybe it will, maybe it won't, and you don't know. It's just a deeply uncomfortable film, and I love it. And again, you care about these people. You care about all the characters and what's going to happen. There's one part where it's kind of later in the movie where the little girl is interviewing the grandma, and she's like, can we talk about that night, the night that mom fought with you? And the grandma just starts like freaking out and almost having a seizure, like she doesn't want to talk about it. And you're like, what happened? Like, what is going on? And like, again, you're like, what is happening? What is going on? And you have to try and figure it out. And of course there's a twist, because friggin' M. Night Shyamalan. And once it's revealed what the twist is, you're like, I'm a friggin' idiot. Like, duh. But it's so good. It's also imminently rewatchable. Imminently rewatchable. When you rewatch it, you're like, oh, it still holds up. It's still friggin' horrifying. And I just love it. I've watched it many, many times. And again, I cry at the last scene. I like weep. Because of course, I don't know. It's just really good. And again, it's one of those movies where even if it weren't scary, the movie itself is good. The character arcs are good, and you care about the characters and what happens to them and their journey. So, yeah. And again, the kids are so likable. Like, they're obviously dorky and stupid, but that makes you like them. So, yeah. 10 out of 10 points for that. I really wish that... Oh, the other thing is, it doesn't have that shaky cam feel. I hate shaky cam where it's supposed to look realistic, but our eyes adjust for our movement, so shaky cam doesn't look realistic. Them filming with the girl's camera and the brother's camera, it's totally... You don't even notice after a while. It's just really well done. So, 10 out of 10, recommend it. Finally, our good movies are The Ritual, which I don't know if it's still on Netflix, but I saw it on Netflix. While The Eye and The Visit you can watch if you're, the average Joe, The Ritual is really, really horrifying. So if you're not into like gore or sheer unadulterated terror, maybe give that one a miss. But if you're into that, watch it. So The Ritual starts where it's these 4 or 5 British dudes just hanging out, and the first scene, something really bad happens. Yikes. And then they all decide to go on this backpacking trip. I'm gonna say Scandinavia. I don't remember what specific country it is. If it's, I don't know. I get all those Scandinavian countries, Norway and Sweden and Iceland. I get them all confused. So it's up north, where it's cold and scary and probably full of like monsters and trolls. Just like it is. So they go backpacking. I believe there are 4 of them. They go backpacking and it's getting dark, and one of them twists their ankle, of course, and they're already kind of fighting. They're all fighting about a certain thing. And so he has a sprained ankle. I believe it starts raining. They can see the lights of the lodge they were going to stay at far away. There's this dip, basically, and they were going to go around the dip to get to the lodge, but they know they're not going to be able to make it in time. So, of course, they take a shortcut, which is your number 1 mistake. Never take a shortcut. You'll die. And the shortcut they decide to take in this dip is this forest. And I'm like, that's your second mistake. Never go into any forests in Northern or Eastern Europe. You'll die. These are just the way the world works. I mean, So they go into the forest, and it's quiet. But they're not too freaked out by it. There's like, they're breaking off twigs and just yakking. They see an old car that probably drove in there in the 70s, They're walking, and then it starts raining more and raining. I do believe they come across a creepy, like, deer that's been disemboweled and strung up, and they're like, ugh, like, weird hunters or whatever, yokels, okay. Again, this is the kind of horror movie where, like, you gotta have some idiocy to make it work, so they're dumb. But then it's raining more, it's pouring buckets, it's dark, they obviously couldn't get as far as they thought they could, and they realize we have to find shelter. And of course, they find a cabin. And to their credit, they're like, that's a murder cabin, like, don't go in there. But they gotta, because what else are they gonna do? So they go in the cabin, and it's creepy and old, and they're like, maybe if someone comes back, we'll just tell them we got lost, they'll understand, but we better make sure no one's in here, we don't want to freak them out. So they go upstairs, and they open this door, and there's this thing in films called a reaction shot, where you don't show what the person is seeing, you show their face, and it's excellent for horror, because you can just show horror without showing what they see. But this is like 10 out of 10 reaction shot where the camera is behind this object and you see the object blurry and the camera's facing the guy's faces in the door and they're just like, and then the camera shows you what they see. And it's kind of an effigy, and it might be a head of a deer with antlers up here, or it might be a headless torso with arms like this. And either way, it's friggin' terrifying. And the people are like, we need to get out of this house. Like, what the heck is this? And, you know, they're like, oh, whatever, like, weird, like, neo-pagan weirdos in this forest, like, whatever. But they all agree, like, we're gonna get out of here ASAP, but we gotta spend the night. Okay. So, they spend the night, and I would say the main character, there's, like, a main one in their group, and he has this weird dream. And he wakes up, and I believe he's outside the cabin when he wakes up, and he hears screaming, and he goes into the cabin, and two of his friends are screaming in their sleep. One of them is like wet themselves, and he wakes them both up, and they're like freaked out. And then they go upstairs, and they see that the fourth friend is like naked and like praying to this effigy in his sleep. And they wake him up, and he's like freaked the heck out. So they're all like, what is going on? And then it gets more horrifying from there. That's like the first 25% of that movie. And what's really funny is my dad watched it first and told me to watch it. And he was like, it's not what you think. And I was like, actually, it's exactly what I thought. And I'm so glad that it was, because it's horrifying. It plays a lot with, like, what's in frame and what isn't, and things in the background, and you're like, I think I know what that is. I think I know what that is. Which is literally how I watched the movie. I was sitting on my couch, like, screaming the whole time and freaking out and being like, what is that? What is that? It's a good movie. And I will say, it's the only horror movie I've ever seen where once they show you the monster, it is more horrifying than what you imagined it would be. Like, because, you know, usually, like, you keep the monster so you can't see it and your mind fills in the blanks and comes up with something terrifying. But these people went to, like, the Dark Souls school of monster making, and then they just ramped it up to 11, and you're like, oh my gosh. Yeah, it's great. Watch it. And even if it weren't scary, it would be a good little movie. Like, the main character has an arc, and it's good, it makes sense, and it's just great. And if you hear weird squeakings from my lap, I have a cat in my lap who she squeaks when she's happy. Anyway, she's a black cat, and I'd show you, but she would be very offended if I put her on camera. Anyway, those are the good movies. Please watch them. They're great. The Eye, The Village, no, not The Village. That was meh. The Eye, The Visit, The Ritual. Great. Unfortunately, we can't all have happy movies, and there's just too much positivity for my channel. Time to talk about a real stinker. Us, by Jordan Peele. And there's a reason it's bad. And if you have noticed the theme of why I like these scary movies, you'll probably be able to guess why I didn't like Us. Because it didn't, or doesn't, or wouldn't hold up. So, if you aren't familiar with Us, I think it came out like 2 or 3 years ago. The premise / the preview is basically there's this little girl who goes into this boardwalk on a beach, and she sees a house of mirrors. And it's funny, too, because there's actually a thing where the house of mirrors is painted different each year, which is totally a thing that happens at carnivals and boardwalks. Like, I used to go to the county fair as a kid, and they'd have houses of mirrors, etc., fun houses, and it would always be some non-copyright infringing painting. Like, it's kind of Indiana Jones, but it's not Indiana Jones, or it's kind of Harry Potter, but it's not Harry Potter. Every year would be something different. So I like that little detail there. Anyway, little girl goes into this fun house mirrors, and she sees her reflections, and then she sees herself, and it's not a reflection. She screams. And then years later, she and her family go back to this boardwalk beach city, and she is like not comfortable. She does not like being there. She does not want to let her family go anywhere near the boardwalk. She's not about it. And late at night, they're just hanging out in their house or their rental house or whatever, and doppelgangers of the family show up, and they're super creepy. and like most of them can't talk except for the mom. She kind of talk like this, like weird, and of course there's doppelgangers of other people, and they have to fight off their own doppelgangers, and it's creepy. Because doppelgangers are inherently creepy. There's a thing that looks like you, but it's not, and you don't know what it is. So I was all excited for this movie. When I saw the previews, I was like, oh my gosh, I want to see this movie. Exciting. But I'm also a weenie, and I wanted to read a little bit about it to see how gross it was first. Because I'm not about, like, slasher movies. Like, not a fan, really. The other thing that I wanted to see about this movie was watching the previews. And now we're going to get into spoilers. So if you don't want to be spoiled for us, watch my next video. Because it's going to be spoilers from here on out. You've been warned. I was hoping, watching the previews, I was like, is the mom a doppelganger? Is the mom a doppelganger? And lo and behold, yes, that is the second twist of the movie. The mother of the family, when she was a kid, switched with her own doppelganger. Kind of an obvious twist, but as I say, I don't mind an obvious twist. It's a cool twist. It's really neat and creepy, and I love it. So I was so excited. And I read that was a twist, and I was like, yes! Oh no! Because there's a first twist. And here's where it all goes downhill. The first twist is the doppelgangers are clones made by some organization under America. And apparently they've made clones of, like, everybody. To control people, maybe to replace them. I don't know. And that's pretty stupid. Oh, they're called the tethered also. Sometimes they have to, like, do what their above ground counterparts do. Sometimes. I don't know. Okay, that's kind of cheesy. Kind of dumb. And it just doesn't hold up. And as I've said, it's okay to have plot holes in a horror movie. If it's still scary. But it can't take you out of the movie. And this is just such a stupid twist. I'm sorry. Because it's not just that they're clones. It's like, this family doesn't live on the beach. This family lives someplace else. They're traveling here. And we're to assume somehow, for some reason, that this government organization, like, shipped the clones of all the different clones of this family to this beach. Or maybe the clones got into a car underground and drove here. It doesn't make sense. Like, when you think about it for 2 seconds, it doesn't make any sense. And the worst, the most egregious thing that, like, I cannot forgive. I was reading about this, so please correct me if I'm wrong, if some reviewer got it wrong. I was like, oh, so the government or whoever is in charge of this facility, like, takes DNA when you're born and makes a clone of you? No, the mom clone and the dad clone, like, have sex and have babies who look exactly like the children of the real mom and the dad, and I'm like, excuse you, Jordan Peele, what are you doing? Like, there's so much wrong with that, I can't even, it blows my mind. Why not just make the kids clones of the kids? No, they're kids of the clones, and I'm like, okay, so we're to assume that the mom clone was ovulating at the exact same time as her like above ground counterpart, and like that exact egg and that dad's exact sperm like exactly went to really like that is, oh my gosh, it's not, it takes you out of the movie. It's too stupid. That's my issue with Jordan Peele's horror, is it's the kind of thing, it reminds me of the 1950s, where, like, he has this other movie called Get Out. Spoilers for Get Out, by the way, but whatever. Where the twist is that there's literally people taking brains from old white people and putting the brains into the bodies of young black people to, like, get their youth and vitality. And I'm like, what the heck? Like, is that supposed to be scary, or is it supposed to be a comedy? Because it's not scary. It's literally the brain that wouldn't die. It's that level of horror, aka it's not scary. It's so dumb. Please don't put science in your horror movies. Just don't. It's so, okay, but even getting away from that, even assuming that there aren't egregious scientific flaws that, like, ruin the movie. Just pretend that it's just a scientific facility that makes clones. I don't get why that's scary. Because at that point, it just turns into your normal slasher movie, where there's a person who wants to kill you and they happen to look like you. That's the thing about clones. Clones aren't scary because clones are basically a twin. It's literally a person grown and raised just like any other normal human, but they're your twin. That's it. That's not particularly scary. It's not scarier. It's not any scarier than a murderer who's just chasing you who doesn't look like you. Unless there was some kind of vulnerability. Like if you were for some reason vulnerable, like I'm going to talk next week about disability in horror. Like if you were disabled, maybe your clone coming after you would be scary. Or if your clone is pretending to be you, that's scary. But just your clone, not scary. And that's what takes me off about this movie, why I have to rant about it, despite never having seen it, is Jordan Peele magically found a way to make doppelgangers, one of the scariest friggin' things in the world, not scary. Because the whole point of doppelgangers is their uncanniness. Let me explain how I would make it. Oh, and let me just say, those first 3 movies I talked about, The Eye, The Ritual, The Visit, those are good movies. They hold up even if they're not scary. Us, I don't think it holds up. Because the whole, like, bedrock of it, of what are these things that look like you, is so dumb and so not threatening. And especially for someone who's as preachy as Jordan Peele about class and race, etc., I'm like, you could have chosen any number of government experiments on which to base your movie. Like, goodness knows the middle of the 1900s was chock full of hideous, unethical human experimentation by the actual government of the US states. No, we're just gonna have random clones that, like, maybe we're gonna replace you with? I don't know. I'm like, okay. Let's just take a step back. Okay, how would I fix it? How would I have made that movie? Remember when I reviewed Something Wicked This Way Comes, and I said I like it because there's a carnival that blows into town, sometimes that just happens, and sometimes people start disappearing. Deal with it. I like The Eye because sometimes, well, always, there's just ghosts. They just exist. Sometimes you can see them. Deal with it. The Ritual. Sometimes there's a patch of forest that an ancient god lives in, and it doesn't like you being there. Deal with it. There's no, like, where did it come from? Here's a scientific explanation that ruins the mystery. No. Here's how you make Us. A little girl goes onto a beach. She sees this weird boardwalk with some non-copyright infringing painting. She goes inside. She sees herself, but it's not a reflection. And then something that isn't her, that has her face, comes out and replaces her. 10 years later, this funhouse is still there, but it's shed its skin and grown a new non-copyright infringing painting to coax in other people that it can replace with things that are not people, but look like them. I would play up the fact of, like, is it the doppelganger or is it not? We don't know. Just like in The Thing, the movie The Thing, a huge part of that is, like, you don't know who is the thing and who isn't. And the movie ends where you don't, it's literally, The Thing ends where there's 2 guys left alive and they look at each other and the light goes out and you're like, oh, I don't know, like, that's why doppelgangers are scary. You don't know what they are. You don't know who they are. You don't know when it's them or not. Just like I talked about Tales from the Gas Station, how the third one has this whole body swapping or kind of pod people arc. It's great because you don't know who is replaced or not. That's how you deal with doppelgangers. And again, sometimes there's just a fun house that exists and it just sucks people in and spits out doppelgangers and you don't know why. That's scary. Clones aren't scary. So that's my review-ish of Us. I just can't. I was so happy and excited. I thought it looked so rad, and then I read about it, and I was like, Jordan Peele, why? Like, If you really like 1950s style horror, great. Watch his stuff, I guess, but I just don't think it would be scary at all. So that's my review. Rave, 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 rant. Give all those movies a watch. Maybe even Us if you're into it. But until then, I will be ranting and raving next week and next Sunday. So see you. Bye.